So from that day to this, the aches, the pains, the vomiting, the diarrhea with the Crohn's disease had instantly disappeared. The first time I heard about Medjugorje was in 1989. I heard about it because I was extremely ill at the time, and the prognosis wasn't good, and we had a benefit concert to help the family financially. And two people were at the concert who ran a travel agency, and they invited my wife Anne and myself to come to a place called Medjugorje. I didn't want to come because God and I were not partners. And the reason that was, my eldest boy, Ken, was born with an incurable illness called cystic fibrosis. And then I was struck down with an illness called Chron's disease. So I got angry with God. So I didn't really want to come. But as it turned out, it was supposed to be my last holiday with my wife, Anne. Came not really believing. I came with a very special priest from Chicago called Father Peter Mary Rookey. And when I met Father Peter Rookey, Father Peter reminded me of the old ministers in the cowboy movies. Very loud, do I hear an amen? And everybody would say, amen. And I was cringing because I'm quite private. And, I just thought this was a little bit American. But arrived, Medjugorje in 1989 was just a one-street town, to be really honest with you. The street started from the bridge in Medjugorje and ended at the roundabout, which subsequently I learned was the ruins of the old Catholic Church. And road left and road right were dirt roads. So that impression I didn't want. I wanted to go back to Dubrovnik. I spent my honeymoon in Savtat, so I wanted action. I wanted plenty of action. But for every reason that I had to leave Medjugorje, my wife Anne always had one reason as to why we should stay a little bit longer. And the ruse was that Father Peter Mary Rookey was supposed to be celebrating Mass in the Church of St. James, which was a lie. He didn't. He wasn't even on the altar. And as I left the Church of St. James, Anne and I got lost. And then I heard Anne scream out, David, wait. And as I turned around, Anne was coming running from the door of the church. She said, David, Father Rookey is having a healing service in the graveyard. Now, I turned to her and said, well, I hope he has more luck than we had him supposedly saying Mass this morning. I said, Anne, I'm going. I'm too sick. I was in excruciating pain because of the Crohn's disease. And she said to me, look, David, on our children's lives, if you come with me to the healing service, as soon as it's over, I'll go back to the house and I'll pack the bags and we'll head off to Dubrovnik. So they were the words I wanted to hear. So we walked around the side of the church, down through the vineyards, because the vineyard was right up close to the church, down through the lovely grove of trees where the statue of the risen Lord is, and then down to the graveyard. It was jammed. There was about 700-800 people there, because Father Rookey was so well known that whenever people said he'd be around, people came, because he had an extremely beautiful gift of prayer for healing. So we arrived down, the place was packed, and in the graveyard there's a little paved area in front of the little burial chapel. And in the middle of this burial chapel was Father Rookey and 3 Irish priests. And he was blessing them as he always did. And then they dispersed and to bless people. And Father Rookey came over close to where I was. And there was a young adult in a wheelchair. And he said, I always remember, he said, are you prepared to take a step in faith for Jesus? That stuck with me to this very day. And the young adult said yes. So he anointed them. And then he went to the next person and he laid hands, and then they fainted. And that's what I would call it. I subsequently found out it's called resting in the Spirit. But I'd never seen this. I thought this was the hocus pocus pastor doing his thing. And he went to the next 6 people. They all went. And of course, me, being cynical, turned to Anne and said, Anne, this is hysteria. Once one does it, they're all going to do it. Nobody wants to be left standing. They all have to be seen to be getting what they're getting on the ground. And if they don't, they're going to feel what's wrong. So Anne told me to shut up. And I went off. I couldn't stand and watch this thing happening. So I came back about 15 minutes later, and then she turned and said to me, David, why won't you have a blessing? And I said, whoa, remember, I'm the atheist. But she said, it'll do you good. You've been extremely ill. So I left again. And I came back, and this thing happened over a period of 2 hours, coming backwards and forwards. And then I eventually said, listen, you're an idiot. You should have had the blessing 2 hours ago, and you could have been off somewhere else. So I stood in line with about 60 people. 3 Irish priests were now working in front of Father Rookey. They blessed me in turn. Nothing happened. And I'm looking at the watch. How long more am I going to be here? And I looked up from my watch, and Father Rookey, he called himself the Rookey priest. He said, I'm just a Rookey priest. And he smiled at me and he said to me, David, there's something you want to tell me. And I said, Father, I don't wish to speak with you. I said, I'm extremely ill. The pain is excruciating. And the doctors say I maybe have 2 weeks to live. So with that, he reached into his pocket and he took out a crucifix about the size of my span, little black crucifix. And that crucifix contained 7 relics of the 7 founders of the Servite order, the servants of Mary. That's where they get the Father Peter, Mary Rookey. All Servite priests have Mary in their names. So he stuck the cross in my right hand. Then he dipped his thumb in the oil and he anointed my forehead. Then he put his hands on my head and started to pray. And then I remember her going to take the crucifix from my hand. And the next thing I remember is lying flat on my back. And I had been in that state for 20 minutes. When I got up off the ground, there was a politician with us from Ireland. Not senior politician, but we have 2 parliaments. We have the senior and the junior one. And they're senators, they're not politicians. So he uses that to great extent in America because a senator in America is high profile. So when I opened my eyes and I'm looking up, who's standing over me? Only this Senator Dolly Cassidy. And I met him because he was involved in the music business. And the first thought when I opened my mind is, oh God, what's he going to go back to Dublin and tell all the hardened drinking musicians about Parks lying on his back in a graveyard? So when I got up and I dusted my clothes down, he said to me, Parks, he said, the Spirit is with you very strongly. You've been out for 20 minutes. But I didn't realize anything had happened except there was a burning heat in my body that went from the top of my head to the tips of my toes. I've never experienced that since Medjugorje or ever before Medjugorje. So from that day to this, the aches, the pains, the vomiting, the diarrhea with the Crohn's disease had instantly disappeared. I was very fortunate to experience a spiritual healing. The greatest of the 2 miracles, as most people call them, was the spiritual healing. I'd been very troubled. I'd no peace in my life. My eldest boy, Ken, as I mentioned, was born with cystic fibrosis. I couldn't come to terms with it. When he was born, I was playing soccer professionally. I had the great honour of playing against Pelé, George Best. I represented my country. And the thoughts of a highly trained, slim, trim, brimful, energy soccer player having a child, an imperfect child, because that's what I call them. I used to call Ken my cross. I just couldn't come to terms with it. And that drove a wedge between Anne and myself. So I left Anne twice. But Anne has an incredible ability to forgive. So she forgave me on both occasions and invited me back to the family home. And thank God we're still together. As we speak, we celebrated 46 years of marriage and we're still holding hands. Because if we let go, we'll kill one another. But what happened was, after the physical healing, the desire to leave Medjugorje had gone. Medjugorje was just on fire within me. And the Church of St. James was like a magnet. I could not stop going to the Church of St. James. So we used to go to Mass 7:30 in Croatian. Then we'd go and have breakfast. And then we'd come back for the German Mass. And then, of course, we had the English Mass. And then sometimes we'd stay for the Italian Mass. That's how serious things were. And we were sitting one afternoon outside the front of St. James, just sitting. Anne and I weren't talking. I was just reflecting on the few days that had gone past. And a lot of people were going past to different nationalities. English people were talking about the peace, and we could hear some Croatian people saying about mir. And some people were saying they experienced this incredible peace up on the Hill of Apparitions. So I turned to Anne, even though I was still very weak after the 2 surgeries and convalescent. And I said to Anne, I said, would you help me to climb this apparition hill where these people are experiencing this peace? Not realizing it was Sunday. And we would call it now Divine Mercy Sunday. So we set off in the afternoon, and when we got up to the hill, it was packed because the parish of Medjugorje, they climbed the apparition hill. So when we got to the place where Our Lady is reputed to have appeared for the first time, it was full. So Anne and I sort of came back down the mountain, and she found this huge big rock and sat on it, and I just stood there with my back to the hill, but looking directly down into the beautiful twin-spired church of St. James. And I didn't know what to do. I wanted to pray, but I couldn't. I'd forgotten how to pray. And I remember saying to myself, I'd say the Our Father, and that's as far as I would get. And then I tried to say the Hail Mary, and all I could get was Hail Mary. And then Anne, who was sitting on the rock, she told me after that she was looking at me, and she saw me getting a bit agitated, because I did get agitated because I couldn't pray. And so she jumped down off the rock, and as she hit the ground, I instinctively turned from looking at the church to her. I extended my arms and I embraced her. And I apologized to her for all the hurt that I'd caused her, all the pain that I'd caused our children, our family members and our friends. And she started to cry. And then she threw her arms around my neck. And then because of that little gesture of love, I started to cry. So we cried in one another's arms for about 10 minutes. But when I stopped crying, I had this most incredible inner peace. An inner peace that seemed to allow David Parks to live with David Parks. I didn't want to leave Medjugorje. As the days got closer to the departure, I didn't want to leave. I was getting too much. I was getting closer to God every minute. My glasses were now, I could see what the Lord wanted me to see through my eyes and glasses. So we went to the airport on the day of departure, and the flight was cancelled. So I wanted to come back, but everybody else, the 165 religious maniacs, as I thought, they were all, if they would have got a hold of the guide, if she'd been in the departure, she would have been dismembered. And I wanted to go back to Medjugorje, and people said, I can't believe your husband wants to go back to Medjugorje. So I wouldn't be, at that point in my life, I would have been very private, and especially about religion. And most people knew that I had anger issues because of cancer. But I remember it took 6 months for my stomach muscles to heal after I had the 2 surgeries. So when I went back home, I still couldn't sing. My muscles weren't strong enough. So I went in 3 days after coming back from Medjugorje into the band to see them all. And when I left to go to Medjugorje, they had been told that I had 2 weeks to live. So they never thought they'd see me well enough. So when I walked in to the Burlington, I was standing up straight now, because prior to all this, I was crouped over. The pain was excruciating. And there were 7 hardened drinking musicians. Most musicians, if they're fully professional, they sustain their life by drinking. It takes away a lot of pain and so forth. So when I went in there, they just stood there with their mouths open and just said, what happened? So I told them. And they said, listen, this is a miracle. There's no way, when you left here a week and a half ago, there's no way we would ever think that you would walk in here. So they went around spreading. I mean, within 3 days, the Musicians Federation were calling me from their office in Dublin. We heard the great news, the great story. But it's like as if the Lord decided when I was here that he wanted me to do something for him. Well, when I went back singing, roughly 6 months after, it was all rock and roll music. And I did it for until September of 1993. But in the whole of September, I felt that I lost the buzz. That's probably the only way I can describe it. And I always said to the band, look, whenever I lose the buzz, there's no point in coming, because there were 7 of us. And I decided I'd like to do something for the Lord. I just felt that he was, putting little things in my heart that he wanted me. But how does it manifest itself? So in June of 1993, this lady, Heather Parsons, who was also a journalist, she wanted to come to Medjugorje during the war to do a documentary on Medjugorje during the war. And she was looking for a volunteer, of course. Here I am, Lord. And my family were distraught, the thought of going to a war zone to do a thing on a holy place. So we came anyway, and we were shooting outside the sacristy door. And at that time, Father Philip Pavic was coordinating the English-speaking pilgrims. And Father Philip, I remember when I was here in 1989, he was the coordinator. He had a lovely voice, always sang. You could have had the Sistine Choir here, and he didn't matter. He led the music. So we were doing a piece to camera, and right behind was the sacristy door, and it opened. And of course, he came out, and in his Chicago accent, he says, "Can anybody sing here?" And of course, I shut up, but the crew said, "Oh, Father, he can." I said, "I'm sorry, Father, I can't sing. I didn't bring my backing tracks with me." Well, he was a little stooped, but he sort of stood up full and he said, "You don't need backing tracks to sing for Our Lady." So I didn't walk through the door, I went under the door, I felt so small. But at communion time, I sang the Ave Maria a cappella. And I sat back down and was heading back out to do the shooting when this big tall man, about 6'6", approached, thin like a rake, and he said to me, "Yeah, what are you doing in September?" And I said, "Who wants to know?" And he said, "My name is Dr. Sam Worley." She said, "I run a Marian conference in Pittsburgh, and I'd like you to come and sing the Ave Maria for us." So that's how the Lord put this whole thing together. So I was invited in September. I sang the Ave Maria, I think probably about 24 times in 3 days, because whenever there was a break, I sang Ave Maria. But there were 10 people there who ran 10 of the largest Marian conferences around America. So I was invited. And then over the next couple of years, it went from just being a speaker. Then I emceed all of these conferences. So the Lord had it all planned. All he was looking for was a yes for me to do it. And God, I was so delighted, so delighted. I've been working here in Medjugorje since 2001. And it was a rather strange episode. I'd been touring America and the world doing Christian concerts from 1993, as I mentioned. At the same time, my son Ken was extremely ill. Ken has cystic fibrosis, so his lungs were deteriorating over a period of time. And there were many times over the years that I would have to abandon a tour and come back because Ken was quite ill. But there was a gentleman who ran a pilgrimage company, the company I work with now, called Marian Pilgrimages. And I used to be a group leader, so I used to bring groups once or twice a year. And for 4 years prior to 2001, we would meet every January because he was going to use this new thing called the internet to promote his business. So I would meet in January and he would say to me, "Listen, David, you're going to be in America. Is there any possibility you might be able to promote? We're putting up the website." So no website ever went up. So in 2001, in January, I got a phone call from Tom to say, "Dave, when are you off to America?" I said, "Tom, next Sunday." "Oh, I need to meet with you before you go." And he said, "This is what I'd like you to do." And I said, "Wait now, Tom." I said, "I can't do anything for you apart from promote your website." I said, "I have a career." "I know, but you'd be able to. When you come home, you'd be able to." I said, "Tom, I can't do that if I came home." And then he came back at me 4 or 5 times, and I always had an excuse. And then the only way I thought, "Now, I'm really going to shake him off," as I said to him, "Look, Tom, Ken is on a transplant list for new lungs. And if he gets a transplant, I'm gone. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. And I don't know how long I would be away for." He said, "We'll cross that bridge when it comes." So I left him, and I drove back home, 5 minutes drive, and when I arrived in, I said, "What happened to you?" I was so perturbed by it all, overwhelmed. I said, "What do you mean?" She said, "Did you have an accident?" I said, "No." I said, "I think I'm after being offered a job." And she said, "Where?" And I said, "In Medjugorje." Well, she jumped up off the seat in the kitchen. It was like as if she'd won the lotto. Now, in the family room, Ken had just come out of hospital on the Friday, and he was sort of immobile. He could only maybe get from the sofa to the bathroom if he needed. And when he heard Anne, all this excitement, he came out to the kitchen, and he said, what's going on? What's going on? And Anne said to him, your dad has after been offered a job. And Ken said, where? And she said, in Medjugorje. So he walked over to me and stood right in front of me, and he looked me straight in the eyes, and he said, and you are taking it, aren't you? I often question myself, why are you here? I love to sing. I would really love to do a concert every night, because I felt that I was healed here in Medjugorje because of the gift of the voice that the Lord gave me. And particularly one beautiful song which started my whole ministry was a beautiful song called Let Me Live. And there are times working with the public is different. Really, it's difficult, because particularly nowadays, we're a very, very demanding group of people. We want everything instantly. And there's no tolerance. The one thing that I would find from working here is that people arrive here with no hope. Absolutely no hope. What was right when we were young is now totally wrong. What's black is now white. So it's very difficult. And the reason I think that the Lord has me here is that I'm very vocal about how generous he is. I'm very vocal about his forgiveness to us. And I'm very vocal that we need to stand up for the Lord. We can't be passive anymore. We really need to be his foot soldiers. We really need to walk the walk. No longer talk about it. There's no point. Talk is cheap. So we have to nail our colours to the cross and say, listen, I'm a Catholic. Because you go to any other faith, whether it be Muslim or Baptist, whatever churches around the world, and they're vocal. They're in your face. And yet we Catholics, we have everything. And yet we don't tell people. Now, I wouldn't be one that would be knocking on everybody's door, but I would always try and let people see that the Lord is present in me, because I do think that we have the ability to entice people to the faith, but equally we've got this ability to turn people away just by what we say or what way we. So for me, it's just the greatest gift that I could ever be given, to be part of this amazing place that has changed millions of people's lives. Millions of people's lives. And just to be able to see, as I would often say when I would meet with the pilgrims, I see me every week coming. I'm always in the front seat. I'm angry. I'm disruptive. And then within 2 days, I see our Blessed Mother has taken them along, and taken them along as they took me so gently to revisit with her son, Jesus. I think people return to Medjugorje because they experience the peace of the Lord. They also experience the love of the Lord. As I said, I'm 68 years of age. When I was young, all we were hit with in school was the fear of the Lord. We were terrified of the Lord. But when I came in 89, one of the first things I learned was the love of the Lord, how much he loves us. And it doesn't matter how far you've been away from him. It doesn't matter what you've done against him, because I often felt I was a bit like St. Peter, or St. Paul, I should say. When I was growing up, I was a choir boy in a church called the Church of St. Paul in Arran Key. And as an 11-year-old, right behind the high altar was this huge big mural of St. Paul falling off the steed. And never realizing that for a couple of years I was like him. I persecuted people. And then when I came here, I realized, God, what the love of the Lord can do for you. And I really think that's why people come back. We would often hear people saying, I'm coming back for a fillip of peace. I'm coming back to get the peace that the Lord can give me. And I suppose that's the greatest compliment that we could pay. One of the wonderful things that is impressive is the wrong word to use, but there's nobody here in Medjugorje, it pushes it on you. There's nobody who says this, that, and the other, do you believe me? And I always remember the guides when I came here first. Remember talking the story about young Yakov coming to Father Yozo and telling them what Our Lady said. But he didn't say to Father Yozo, you do believe me. And that, I think, is the greatest testimony. You know, I'm telling you this, you do what you want with it. And my youngest son, Gary, when he came, he was terrified coming here because he thought there was some sort of a machine that you walked in, it hit you, bzz, and you were zapped, and he came home. I called them Medjiites. But it's just that you feel loved here. You really, and the friends that you make here in Medjugorje, if you're on a pilgrimage, even though you mightn't meet them again, but it's a friendship that's true. You remember what they said, you remember the hurt, you remember the pain that they had. And I suppose most of the miracles that would take place in Medjugorje would be around the dinner tables in the houses. You know, there could be the quietest of people sitting at a table who hasn't spoken all week. And then maybe the day before you go home, they relate a story that's just so mind-boggling. And you realize that she's the reason that you're here. You never met her before, but she has the answer that you've been looking from the Lord. So Medjugorje never ceases to amaze me. Every day there's something new. There's an extra increase of grace and blessings from here.